Hi, everyone. So today we're talking about the motion, "This House regrets the widespread belief that motherhood is a rewarding experience." So one important thing in a narrative motion is that we are able to characterize the narrative in a precise but also reasonable and fair way for both sides. So I think on the proposition side, a strategic but still fair characterization would be to say something along the lines of, for many years, society has engaged in an intense campaign to persuade women to bear children, usually by glorifying motherhood and by protecting and promoting the myth that it is an intensely rewarding experience for all women. And to talk about how that narrative actually manifests, right, in a material sense. First, it's generally taboo to speak of regretting having children. Abortion is heavily stigmatized and unsafe. Women tend to be defined by motherhood and are expected to identify quite strongly with their role as mothers and to speak of motherhood as a source of joy. There is, of course, a recognition of the suffering of mothers and the sacrifice involved. But ultimately, in the way up, society tends to think and protect this myth that women derive happiness from motherhood. And despite the challenges involved, the experience is ultimately worth the suffering. Hence, the dominant representation of it as rewarding. And I think it's important for Prop to say, look, it's not that they deny that this is an empirically true experience for some women, but increasingly, we're starting to find out that it's not the case for most women, but that hasn't quite seeped into public discourse yet. Now, how do we know? We know from more esoteric fora, for example, private spaces, indie publishers and spaces, academia, there's more research into this. There's an increased acknowledgement that this does not capture the whole range of experiences, but public discourse in general still tends to hold as dominant the idea that it is a rewarding experience. Now, that characterization is quite important. And so, absent this widespread belief, Prop also needs to be able to explain what kind of perceptions around motherhood would they prefer. And I think to sketch out a more even-handed conception, for example, to think of motherhood the way we would for most careers, good for some people, bad for some people, certainly not for everyone. There are some good things about the job. There are some bad things about the job. It's okay to regret this job. It's okay to change jobs, right? Opposition will need to challenge this characterization a little bit without completely disagreeing with it. So I think Op should say, look, that might have been true like 50 years ago, but the world is opening up to counter narratives as well. And you have a plurality of narratives. And in fact, there are so many like pressures in this neoliberal world that we live in against motherhood, precisely because women know that it is difficult to pull off both motherhood and career. And when women are said to experience motherhood as a rewarding experience, the way this is understood is it is rewarding because it is valuable. It is rewarding because you know you are contributing to society and the nation, not just rewarding in a very superficial way or in a way that just benefits yourself. So those tend to also result in better conditions for mothers. So I think this is how you're going to characterize it on both sides. And obviously, both teams need to be willing to play ball with each other's characterizations. Now, on Prop, I see 4 lines of arguments. Some of them might be independent lines for closing teams. If not, each of these 4 arguments, especially the first 3, tend to be quite multi-layered. So there definitely will be enough material for closing. So the first argument is that it's just coercive in terms of pressuring women into having children. Second, that it unfairly punishes mothers who opt out of motherhood, who cannot be mothers, or who are struggling as mothers. And then the third is that it entrenches inegalitarian or sexist models of the family and gendered divisions of labor and society. And lastly, the impact on kids who are unwanted or uncared for, where women are unable to say no to being mothers anyway. So in terms of why this is coercive, I think this debate does provide for a lot of room for rhetorical grandstanding and characterization as part of the argument. So I think the crux of this argument is to say many women internalize the idea that motherhood is one of the best achievements they can have as women, and that their lives would be incomplete without it. And society signals this to them pretty strongly in many ways. So women's families telling them to have kids at a certain age. So all of these expectations and disapproval and disappointment that women face when they don't conform to these expectations. The idea of the biological clock is also internalized. And so many women feel compelled to become mothers before their time runs out, or they will regret it forever because this is supposed to be quite a defining, rewarding experience for them. And so for them, for many women, the decision to become a mother is so heavily culturally conditioned by the premium placed on it by society that it is not an informed choice. So I think that's what you're trying to do with this argument. And then you argue that it's actually problematic to coerce women into this by, misinforming them that it is meant to be very rewarding, because it's not actually an indisputably and objectively good outcome or rewarding outcome for all women. And it definitely has trade-offs that should be recognized and acknowledged, right? Which this narrative conceals. So for example, the effect on women's bodies and health, the physical and the psychological risks involved of pregnancy and childbearing, including the risk of postpartum depression, which is almost not discussed in public discourse and very, very underdocumented. The effect on women's lives and careers. Motherhood is often intertwined with increased childcare and domestic responsibilities disproportionately borne by women globally. And so without this myth that it is rewarding for all women would be in a better position to independently assess the risks and rewards without feeling like they would be incomplete if they, opt out of it, right? Second, and I think this one provides room for more, granular case study analysis. It unfairly punishes women who opt out of motherhood, cannot be mothers, or who are struggling mothers. So the idea that motherhood is so essential to women's happiness and purpose in life because it's so rewarding, it does lead to harsh judgments towards women who do not conform to this expectation. So because women face constant pressure from families, partners, and society constantly, even at a time when they're just building their career or just defining their own identities, they're not even 100% sure what they would have independently wanted. Those women who resist this pressure are ostracized by their families and communities, some of whom might be well-meaning and some of whom might not. But even if, when parents believe that it is truly in the interest of their daughters to be mothers because this will define your life, then they are more likely to ostracize or disapprove of daughters who don't follow this path. And this is a source of anguish. That alone is already problematic, right? Further, this belief that motherhood is its own reward anyway, it's for your own good, it's meant to make you happy, then intersects with other patriarchal tendencies to control women's bodies, right? And actually reinforces those, supports those. So the opposition to providing women access to contraception or abortion, for example, is rooted in viewing sex as tied to procreation, but also as natural, as divinely ordained way for women to be happy and to realize their place in this world, right? And so this burden, though, disproportionately affects women, as you've already established earlier. And then what about women who do become mothers but end up regretting this decision or struggling with the consequences? They feel ashamed. They feel like the problem is them. And they too get stigmatized when they try to suggest that this is a problem, right? So there's no space to openly discuss this regret or this struggle or to seek help for it. Now, if we recognize motherhood as similar to any other occupation or lifestyle, which people should be able to choose freely instead of something that is universally meaningful and necessary for women, we would be more accepting of the choices of women to not have children. We would be more willing to support access to contraception or abortion. More women would not have to suffer mental anguish, suffer unsafe abortions, or beat themselves up over not being able to have kids, like biologically. So in short, the message that's being sent to women is, if you don't find it rewarding, it's your fault. There's something wrong with you. You can't chat about postpartum depression or even just general unhappiness or regret. You'll be seen as dysfunctional It's a you problem. And this is a form of psychological abuse and has serious material consequences, which you can, spend a lot of time demonstrating. Third argument, it entrenches in a very sexist model of the family and a gender division of labor in the market, right, or in society. So women are disproportionately expected to perform childcare responsibilities and housework, which is associated with it. These are significant amounts of voluntary, unpaid voluntary work. And it's not seen as unfair because it's seen as something they enjoy anyway. Never mind the well-documented harmful effects on their well-being and also on their status in the family. So they are a lot more precarious because they don't have their own money. They're seen as financially dependent on the men, even if their work is actually, valuable and essential to the survival of family and the society. It's undervalued because it's seen as not work, but actually intimacy and something that they enjoy anyway. This also affects men, by the way, because men are told that this is not for them. Women are meant to find this rewarding, not men, which is why even in societies where, parental leave is available, there's a low uptake on the part of men because women and men both internalize that this is primarily something the woman should find rewarding. And in some cases, men get shamed for wanting to stay home with their families and find it rewarding because it's something only women should find rewarding, right? So this is a motherhood thing, not a parenthood thing. Women who are mothers in the workforce also suffer additional disadvantages relative to women who are not mothers in terms of pay and performance evaluation, lots of space to extend that. So in the same way that we refer to essential workers as heroes during pandemics and emergencies, but do not really account for their rights and their welfare as workers, we expect mothers to perform these sacrifices for free because motherhood is its own reward, right? Now, in fact, if we recognized it as difficult and grueling, and if actually fewer women were willing to become mothers as a result, which we are seeing happen in isolated cases, for example, societies with high aging populations, because women are just like, nope, nah, then society may have more of an incentive to compensate mothers fairly for their reproductive labor, more parental leave access, more incentives for men as well to access parental leave, anti-discrimination laws to protect female workers from the motherhood penalty, affordable childcare, compensation for individuals to stay at home and perform domestic work. So also just better healthcare for mothers. At the moment, 800 women die every day from pregnancy and childbirth related causes, again, because we think they're doing something that they naturally want or enjoy anyway. And so there's a lot of space to play with this argument. And of course, when you do it, you need to be very, very careful because you might end up conceding that in certain pockets of the world, women are already opting out of this narrative, right? But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily because it's something OP is going to say anyway, right? And in that case, I think you just find a way to co-opt it and say, yes, and in those situations, women have significantly more bargaining power because people are not blinded by the myth that motherhood is its own reward. They know it's hard. And that's what you want to mainstream for the rest of the world. Finally, the last item is a discussion of kids who are unwanted and uncared for and the social ramifications of that. This is something that, you might see as contingent on the previous points being proven, but can also be a standalone point that you run away with at extension. All right, let's go to OP because we are now at 15. So I think on OP, as I've said, there's some counter framing and counter characterization of how this narrative plays out without necessarily, disagreeing with some key features that Prop highlighted. I think there are 4 things that OP can talk about. 1, it is an accurate representation of many women's experiences, and it's important to honor those experiences. 2nd, that this narrative is important to ensure society values the labor performed by mothers. 3rd, this is actually a necessary counterbalance to careerism and pressures on women to choose between career and family. Finally, it's protection for mothers or parents who don't conform to normative ideals. So, in reality, the first point, right, that it's just an accurate representation, motherhood is a fulfilling and rewarding experience for many women. And I think you need to push back here and say, look, this narrative by no means suggests that it is always, easy and enjoyable. In fact, there's a lot of focus on the labor performed by women and the challenges of being a mother. Like the motif of sacrifice is quite prominent in these conversations about motherhood being rewarding. Despite that, though, significant majority of women do express that the experience on balance is life-defining. And imbued them with a sense of purpose, and we should not erase that. This should be recognized and celebrated. And also, it's no longer coercive to celebrate motherhood as rewarding, because there are other trends that exist that can facilitate free and independent decision making by individual women. More women than ever have a university education and access to reproductive health tools than ever before. And more women than ever before have also decided to live child-free and talk about this quite openly. Second, this narrative is important to ensure society values the labor performed by mothers and that fathers have a more proactive stake in childcare. So again, this narrative has evolved over time. And we need to have a chat about what its manifestations are in contemporary times, right? It's not incompatible with saying that fathers should be more involved in childcare. In fact, the argument is because it is so rewarding, fathers are being deprived of this important connection to their children, and they too deserve this kind of work-life balance. So they too should be given access to, parental leave, and that we should start thinking of parenting as something that is shared by all parents. It is true that society could be doing more to improve the lives of mothers, but why are we in a better position to demand that if we think of parenting as rewarding? The only reason, the main reason parenting is thought of as rewarding is because it is doing something valuable. In some ways, it's a sacrifice. It contributes to nation building, to both the biological and social reproduction of the nation. That's where the reward comes from. So it's not, again, as I said at the beginning, a superficial form of reward or a vain or narcissistic form of reward, right? It's rooted in making an important social contribution. And so that bit doesn't get left out. And I mean, sometimes it can, but it is very easy to deploy that bit intentionally and consciously in campaigning for better protections and rights for mothers. And that is literally the strategy being used by mothers and feminists and social activists anyway, right? So it actually is using this narrative to call attention to what society owes mothers and for greater equitability between men and women in child raising. Now, if society doesn't view motherhood as supremely important, we will be more likely to devalue the labor performed by mothers, especially if we already do live in a patriarchal context, as Prop said, right? Third, the glorification of motherhood is a necessary counterbalance to careerism and pressures on women to choose between career and family. So as more and more women enter the formal workforce and seek parity with male coworkers, and fair enough, they face increased pressure to prioritize their careers over having children. And in today's neoliberal economy, there's actually the reverse norm of viewing motherhood as a liability to one's career, and women are constantly told this. So many women workers, they know about the motherhood penalty, right? That they could face implications on career progression. And so for women who might want children, and many do, this is a painful and difficult decision, and they can actually be coerced into giving up on their desire for children in exchange for professional success. But many of them do end up regretting this decision in life, and that's something that is also well documented. So this narrative that we have, which coexists with many other counter narratives, is a reminder that motherhood is not incompatible with being a modern woman or a career woman, that it is a rewarding experience. And it also makes it easier to protect women against workplace discrimination, because what you are essentially doing is fighting for a right to do something that is meaningful and important. And so again, if it were viewed as just like any other ordinary lifestyle choice, then it becomes easier to accept the trade-off being forced upon working women by the capitalist system, which is to choose between motherhood, which apparently is not an important thing anyway, and their careers. But calling it rewarding means we are asking them to give up something so central to their identity, central to their happiness. So it's easier actually to lobby for protecting their right to be mothers that way. Finally, the narrative is essential in protecting mothers or parents who don't conform to normative ideals. You're gonna have to do a little bit of massaging here, because it's a regrets motion, and in some ways this is like predicting how the advocacy will play out. But you can point to specific instances already where it has played out in this way, right? So I think you push back a bit on the narrative that society wants everyone to procreate. As a matter of fact, that's not true. Nations are racist, right? And heterosexist. Society doesn't want everyone to procreate. It doesn't want LGBT people to procreate. It doesn't want migrants to procreate. It doesn't want teenage women to procreate. In fact, with these populations, indigenous people, right? With these populations, they tend to stigmatize or forbid procreation, actually. So the narrative that motherhood is rewarding has been historically stretched to the narrative that parenthood is rewarding and that children are essential to the happiness of a family and the right to form a family is essential to individual self-determination. That's tied to the idea of it being a rewarding experience. And it actually leads to greater acceptance of these choices and to the validity of these, and to a great recognition of the validity of these choices. Because if it is something so rewarding, then people are entitled to demand the right to do it. Now, imagine a world where motherhood weren't seen as a rewarding experience. It becomes so much easier then to withhold this right from people or make it much harder for people to access support when they become mothers or parents, because it's just seen as, not essential to your identity or your happiness anyway. So I hope this was helpful, and enjoy the rest of the videos.